So let's move ahead with question number 24. Can you explain SharePoint workflows? Now this is a theoretical video, but it's a very essential video because we need to understand the base on which SharePoint workflows actually stand on. So what we'll do is that we will just go through some theory of SharePoint workflows in this video, and in question number 25 and 26 we will look into more of practical videos of SharePoint workflows. If you have keenly observed, you will see that one of the important things about SharePoint is that it uses a lot of existing Microsoft technologies and then leverages upon it. For example, it uses ASP.NET and builds its site pages, etc. It uses IIS to host itself. It uses SQL Server to store its localized and globalized information. So in other words, SharePoint uses a lot of existing Microsoft products and it has built this whole collaboration tool, that is SharePoint. Now when we talk about SharePoint workflows, even they are also not different. SharePoint workflows basically uses Windows workflow as the base and adds to it content-centric workflows. Now when we say content-centric workflows, that means that they are human workflows. For example, you can make a workflow called as approve and disapprove in Windows workflow. Now when you attach this workflow in SharePoint, you need to attach to a content type like student or something, or like invoice. Now what happens is this approve becomes student passed, the disapprove becomes student failed, and in the same way probably for invoice content type, the approve can become invoice paid and the disapprove can become invoice not paid. So in other words, what we can conclude is that SharePoint workflows are human workflows. They are attached to contents, they are attached to lists and documents. So let's revise. SharePoint workflow sits on top of Windows workflow and adds content-centric workflows, or in other words we can say human workflows, to SharePoint. Whenever we talk about SharePoint workflow, we cannot talk about SharePoint workflow in isolation. In other words, the SharePoint workflow needs to be associated either with a list, with a document type, or with a content type. So we can say that SharePoint workflows are always talked in conjunction with a SharePoint object. Now because of this typical nature of a SharePoint workflow, there are four phases through which a SharePoint workflow goes through. The first phase is the associate phase. In this phase, the workflow is attached to a content type, a list type, or a document type. The second phase is the initiate phase. In this, the workflow object is created and it is ready to take up commands. The third is a modify phase. In this phase, the workflow instance is modified. In other words, probably the user is sending in commands like approve, disapprove, etc. So the workflow object gets modified. And finally is the completed phase, where the workflow object is terminated. And now whenever we talk about SharePoint workflows, they are nothing but they are extension of Windows workflow engine. So basically SharePoint workflow basically stands on the top of Windows workflow and adds to it human-centric workflow, or you can say content-centric workflow. So how does it happen? Now when any SharePoint page, list, document type sends in a command to the workflow, it is not sent directly. It is basically sent through the WSS. So WSS basically acts as a layer or encapsulates all the nitty-gritties of the Windows workflow runtime. So it acts as a layer in between the Windows workflow runtime and your SharePoint objects. So you can say that WSS basically extends the Windows workflow runtime and gives you the feature of content-centric or human-centric workflow. Now what we'll do is that in the coming up sessions, we will try to practically see how we can utilize the default workflows given by SharePoint and how we can develop our custom workflows.